New Year 1920-21. But it was resolved when Bates and Thomas went to see Hepworth, much to the disapproval of Mr. Carson. They came back with the news that far from being cheated, Hepworth was trying to move some of the old stock and had an agreement with a shop in Thirsk for stock of new appliances. "I still don't believe him," Bates told Thomas, when they had returned, and Lord Grantham's valet had gone toiling off up the hill and back to Downton when Thomas Barrow decided to pay a call to Mr. Crawley. "You are just in time," Mrs. Crawley told him, inviting him into the sitting room. Matthew was just going out. "I heard my name. What have I done this time, Mother?" he joked, looking around the door frame. He smiled when he saw Thomas and strode into the room. "Milo, that is, Mrs. Barrow, is back at Downton," he said. Thomas nodded. "Miss Ashby, for the purposes of business," he told Matthew Crawley and, as Mrs. Crawley excused herself, proceeded to tell him what was going on. "It is up to Milo, of course," Matthew told him, "as she is the legal owner and landlord. But, if he is mismanaging the place and you can prove it, then he can be made to leave at any time. If he challenges it in a court of law, he would have to prove she had no grounds for eviction. The law is weighted in her favor," Matthew Crawley added, frowning as if he vaguely disapproved. "But she has a difficulty. There would be no one to take over the shop. It is specialized work," Thomas explained, his desire of owning his own shop for timepieces flitting into his mind for a moment. "Does she have to? Could the shop be redesignated for something else? The goods put into storage if she does not want to part with them?" Matthew moved to the table in the window and glanced out over the lawn. The frost was beginning to melt on the grass, though in the shade the ice was still coating the blades. "A fine, cold winter's morning." "I will put it to her," Thomas told him. "Do you know anyone who would like to take up vacant possession?" Matthew turned to him, and smiled. "As a matter of fact, I do," he told Thomas. "A man and his wife from Ripon wish to set up in the area near their daughter. The man's trade is leather goods, bags, shoes, belts, and the like. The ground at the back would be ideal for him to receive the hides, and the storeroom is large enough to keep them." Thomas nodded. It did seem ideal. "In that case, on behalf of Milo, will you put it to them?" "But it is not in vacant possession yet?" Matthew Crawley asked. "It soon will be," Thomas assured him, gripping his hat and preparing for Mr. Crawley to show him out. "Don't worry," he added to himself, "I'll be making sure of that." "And I look forward to seeing you both tonight," Matthew Crawley added, "at the servants' ball." Thomas smiled, in spite of himself. For that was another thing. Milo had misunderstood the nature of the ball and taken its name literally. She was neither a member of the family, nor a servant. "It does not say guests," Milo had argued the night before. Thomas had been tired and had not found the words to explain properly to her that she was, of course, included. So he would now have to go back to Downton and, amongst arrangements for it, find the words to convince her. 88,888,888. "No, I don't want to go," she had protested, when Thomas appeared at her door. She got up, and went to the wardrobe. "I have no dress." "You have a dress, the one you married in," Thomas told her. "Lady Mary has it. You can ask Miss O'Brien to fetch it for you." "It doesn't fit without a corset." Thomas asked for more and O'Brien went to fetch it anyway, but Milo had folded her arms and looked defensive. Thomas thanked his former confidant, closing Milo's bedroom door lest the servants, Ivy and Daisy in particular, wished to eavesdrop. "Come here, put it on, I'll make it fit." But Milo stood firm. "I am to go back to Manchester tomorrow," she told her husband. Thomas stopped, shocked. He hadn't expected that. And he felt his heart begin to pound at the thought of her absence. He had rather got used to Milo being around. "So soon?" "Chadwick is returning early." "Ashby, he told me, be ready, we need to be on the pitch blind." "Then, would you come with me, for I will miss not seeing you every day." Thomas was at pains for her to understand. With a little more cajoling Milo, as Thomas looked at the brightness of the sun through the high window while Milo got down to her slip, and stepped into the dress. He looked to her and pulled it over her shoulders. "It's not too bad, Thomas told her, and he proceeded to stitch some of the seams, before encouraging her out of it, and Milo stood in her slip as Thomas turned the dress inside out, pulled the seams and made it fit her. Reluctantly, Milo put it back on, and was suddenly amazed how it now fitted. "Will you go to the ball with me tonight, Lucina?" Thomas asked her. Milo looked from her dress to her husband. "Yes," she nodded, and Thomas beamed, before leaving her to get dressed again and back to her work. 88,888,888. But Milo didn't stay at work for long. With her wedding dress, Milo's mind drifted to the opal necklace that Thomas had given to her. Where would it be? She had been given strict instructions never to bother the family, so Milo knew she couldn't seek out Lady Mary. But, she reasoned, that did not stop her from looking for it herself. Mary Crawley had told her she would keep them safe for Milo, so, from the back stairs, Milo headed to her room. Where would they be? Milo's mind worked as she thought, and after just a few minutes of drawer opening and box lid lifting, she found the silk-covered box that Thomas had given to her in the bottom of Lady Mary's chest of drawers. Inside was indeed her necklace, and, nestling into the corner of the satin lining, was her wedding ring, the ring that had once belonged to her mother. Milo turned and walked slowly towards the door, slipping the ring onto her finger and smoothing the band, looking at the metal sparkle in the lights. "Now hold on just a minute." The voice came sharply, and angrily, and Milo saw Tom Branson in the doorway of Lady Mary's room. He stood in the way as Milo tried to slip past, but he put out an arm to stop her, and reached for the box. "No!" Milo exclaimed, shocked. "How dare he take her belongings?" "Why, you little thief!" Tom Branson went on, opening the box. But Milo was quick, and she lifted out the delicate opal necklace. Tom's hand went to them, and grasped them tightly, and between them, in an instant, the jewels had tumbled apart, bouncing all over the carpet of the bedroom and the hallway. Milo took some steps back, in horror. Tom Branson looked at her, and then cuffed her about the ear. "You are lucky you are not in Ireland, or you'd be hanged," he scolded her. But Milo had fallen to her knees and was trying to pick up all of the gemstones, bowing her head when the realization that her beloved necklace had broken hit her. She put her hands to her face. "Me Lucina?" It was Lady Mary's voice now. "Come, get up." "What happened?" Reluctantly, Milo stood up, but she was looking to the floor, feeling that her face was red, and knowing she would probably sob aloud if Lady Mary made to talk to her. "I found this thief in your room," said Tom Branson severely. Mary Crawley turned her head and stared at her brother-in-law. "So, Milo was in my room?" With this, Tom Branson told her, handing her the silken box. Mary made a tsh sound, and looked away for a second. Then, she stooped down to Milo's level and began to help her round up all the stones. "I will get them mended for you, dear child," she told Milo. And then she stood back up and turned cold features to Tom. "I am sorry, Lady Mary, I thought they were yours and she was taking them," Tom made to explain. "Well, they are not," Mary replied, with stiff outrage. "They belong to ... me Lucina, and that is the end of it." She looked to the floor and saw two more opals. "This necklace, all that is in this box is hers. Probably the only things she has precious, I would imagine," she added. Tom looked down to the distraught Milo, who was still kneeling with her head bowed. "Look, your wedding ring," Mary added, noticing it on the carpet by her feet, for it had fallen off Milo's finger when she had fallen to her knees. Mary Crawley scooped it up and nestled it into the box, before pressing it into Milo's hand. "I am sorry for it," Tom Branson said. "Truly I am," he told Lady Mary. He looked down at Milo, and then registered the word that his sister-in-law had used, wedding ring. "I will go," he said, and turned back onto the gallery. "It is probably for the best," Lady Mary called after him, before offering a hand to Milo. "I just wanted it," Milo told her, as she go up. "Of course, you can have your box whenever you like, please just ask me." Milo looked at the box. "Do you wish me to still keep them?" she asked, when they are mended. Milo nodded. "I would only lose them, or break them," Milo sniffed, pitifully. "Well, they're broken now," Lady Mary replied, scooping up another opal, "but I have a jeweller down in London and I can get them mended." "How many were there, do you know?" Milo shook her head. "Hold on then," Mary Crawley said, looking onto the carpet, and retrieved 3 more. "I can pay," Milo told her, as Mary wrapped up all the gemstones inside her handkerchief. She looked at Milo, indignant. "He should pay, if anyone," Mary insisted. "I saw him pull them out of your hands." Behind Lady Mary, she saw her husband, Matthew. "They were from Thomas," Milo told him, as he glanced at Mary, holding the remains of the necklace as delicately as she might an injured bird. "I know," Matthew said. "I was there, remember?" "Anyway," Mary Crawley said, giving her husband a disapproving look. "I will pay, and I will keep them for you, Milo," she told her. "Just next time, ask before you go looking for them." Milo nodded, twisting her wedding ring on and off her finger. She made to go, but Mary stood in her way. "Do you care for him, Milo?" "Love him, Mr. Barrow?" Mary asked suddenly. Matthew, who was about to ask Milo for a few words about the tenancy of her house and shop, frowned at the personal nature of his wife's questions. But, he supposed, it was a source of gossip, even more so because it had been suppressed. Milo shook her head. "Then why do it?" She ignored the look of disapproval on Matthew's face. "Because I wanted to go to work with Professor Otherord, with Chadwick," Milo admitted. "And because he's Thomas." Mary Crawley nodded. She supposed she understood. Wasn't that like it was for aristocrats? At least she had fallen in love with Matthew Crawley, unlike her cousin Patrick. Fair enough. It is no different to what the gentry do. But Milo's eyes drifted to Mary's hand. She could not answer. She was dreading the look on Thomas's face when she told him they were broken. So she sat in her room, glancing at her near-packed bags, telling herself that not going to the ball that night was punishment enough, when in fact it wasn't. It might be a punishment for other people. For Milo, it was a relief. "Hello, what's the matter?" asked Alfred, who was passing the under-housekeeper's room and heard soft crying. He saw Milo, hands to her face. "Here, hang on," he said, but Milo had turned away and throwing herself on her bed, sobbing heartily. I'm sorry, she cried, her words muffled into her bedclothes. "What's the matter?" Thomas had seen Alfred pause at Milo's door and had changed course from the servants' dining room. "I don't know, Mr. Barrow," Alfred admitted. "I just found her like this." "Get out of the way." He growled at Alfred, and stepped towards Milo. Behind him, others came down the passageway, Mrs. Hughes, Daisy. Thomas placed both hands on her shoulders. Behind Alfred, Jimmy peered, looking at the racking form of the girl he actually liked the look of. Will everyone just go? Thomas got back to his feet, pushing the door closed. He turned to look at Milo, who hadn't moved. I'm sorry, she said again. "What for?" Thomas asked her, trying to keep his voice moderate. If one of those footmen had upset her. Jimmy, perhaps, he would dash. "Why are you sorry? What has happened?" Milo turned. Her face was blotchy red, and her eyes red-rimmed. She seemed to have used up every ounce of energy in her sorrow. He took her hands, remembering a time when she had been small, and she had been told off by Mr. Carson for being somewhere she shouldn't. It had taken a long time for Ernest, for her father, even himself, to calm her and get to the bottom of the matter. The necklace. It got broken, Milo told him, through sobs. Then she wrenched herself out of his grasp and began to sob again. "Which necklace?" Thomas asked. "How?" "My wedding necklace, from you," she told him, but how she wouldn't answer. How could it be that 1 minute, this nearly grown-up young woman could live away from home and work amongst strangers, happily, for months, give a talk on a specialist academic subject that few people in the world really understood, as if she had been trained in public speaking? Then something happens like this and she is inconsolable. Who? Thomas tried again, and this time the words came from Milo's mouth. "Mr. Branson. He saw me with them. He assumed I must be stealing them." She looked at him pitifully, and Thomas sat down next to her, drawing her to him in a hug, as if she were 6 again. "Look, get cleaned up, Thomas told her. "We have a ball to go to this evening." He let go of her and crossed to the door. Sure enough, the servants were still outside, including the housekeeper, and they sprang away when Thomas opened it. Only Daisy had the good grace to look ashamed and leave. He glared at the footman and Ivy, eager faces, trying to be nosy. Milo glanced through too and saw Jimmy, the man who she knew Thomas had feelings for, and she was grateful when Daisy pushed them all away. "Mrs. Hughes, can you sit with Milo for a few moments?" he asked her. Mrs. Hughes looked past Thomas and was relieved to see the girl was no longer crying. "Well, not now, I can't. I can ask Daisy." Thomas Barrow looked to the undercook and nodded a concession. Then, when Daisy had gone in, he stood with his back to the door, arms folded, as if on guard. Only then did Alfred, Jimmy and Ivy scuttle away, with Mrs. Hughes's chastisements in their ears. "Can I make your hair nice?" Daisy asked her, sitting down next to Milo when the door closed. Milo looked across to the young lady, who she rather liked. Daisy had always been kind to her. "I don't know, can you?" Milo asked. "I don't know," Daisy replied. "I can try." She looked at Milo's crumpled form and asked her to stand up, whereupon the dress unfolded and Thomas's handiwork on making it fit her made Daisy gasp at its loveliness. "You look beautiful," Daisy told her. But Milo began to cry again, fists to her face. "What is the matter?" asked Daisy, kindly. "It's the servants' ball," Milo admitted. "I don't fit." Downton's undercook frowned. "What do you mean you don't fit?" Milo sighed, and was determined not to cry again. "I am neither a member of the family, nor a servant," she told her. "I agreed to go with Thomas," Milo admitted. "But it's the servants dancing with the family. I don't fit." Daisy had to admit Milo had a point. "Well then," Daisy told her, "we will make a new category for you." "What do they call you at university?" "Ashby," said Milo. "No, I mean your working title." "Like I am undercook." "Associate researcher." "Well then," Daisy concluded, reassuringly. "So tonight, that's what you are, an associate researcher. You did your experiments here, didn't you?" Milo nodded, allowing Daisy's words to sink in. She didn't have to be a servant nor family to go. "Can I do your hair?" Daisy asked. "I need the practice." "What for?" Daisy couldn't have said. But she knew it was a good way of getting Milo to let her. And Daisy styled her hair. Milo didn't really care how. She had seen Daisy do her own hair, and Ivy's before, when they had gone off to church or on an outing. If she thought it was a good style, then that was good enough for Milo, who had no opinion on those things. She nodded what she thought was enthusiasm when Daisy brought the mirror close to Milo's face to show her the style. It was neat and out of the way, at least, Milo thought, a little curled, with her ribboning. She knew people were being kind to her, but Milo was still put about her broken necklace. A knock came to the door shortly after Daisy had put down Milo's brush. "Milo, we are going up," called Thomas's voice. Daisy pointed to the door, and Milo nodded for the girl to open it. At the threshold, Thomas stood, looking little different to his normal guise of an evening servive. Upstairs he was always immaculate. By contrast, it took seconds for Milo to become disheveled, and she could already feel some of her hair falling out of the pins that Daisy had put in for her. Thomas held out an arm as Daisy stepped past him. The undercook turned and watched Milo take it, eyes wide as they looked at one another in such a way that anyone who did not know them might assume they were a couple very much in love. "Would you see that?" "The look he gave her?" asked Jimmy behind Daisy. "And she him," Ivy added. Daisy turned to see them, and Alfred, watching Milo and Thomas go upstairs. "But isn't he?" Alfred began, then fell silent when he saw Jimmy's face. "He still looks at me," Jimmy told Alfred when Mr. Carson had allowed them upstairs to get ready. "I see him sometimes, and then he turns away when he sees I have noticed." They paused at the bottom of the back stairs. Alfred nodded. "Do you like her, then?" Alfred asked Jimmy. A bit," he admitted. "Then you mustn't," Alfred told him. "Because, I know that. Stop you prattling, the pair of you. or I will send the women upstairs first to change," Mr. Carson threatened. "And goodness only knows how long that will take." 88,888,888. She would get the train tomorrow, Milo told herself as she stood in the hall with the servants and the family. She was all packed, and there was a train at 9. Milo looked around, and her heart began to beat faster. She felt dreadful, ill. She didn't know what to do, or what was expected of her. Thomas escorted her to a seat, and then left her there. It was as she feared. Servants and family, nothing in between. And a stab of pain across her heart reminded her of her broken necklace. It would be mended, Lady Mary had told her. But it would not be the same as when he gave it to her. "We will dance together later," Thomas told Milo, "but now I have to dance with the Dowager Lady Grantham." Milo nodded, not really trying to understand why it had to be so, and she watched the family in their finery dance with the servants in their best clothing. Not all of the servants were dancing, however, and Alfred glanced over to Milo, and nodded. Milo nodded back. Perhaps that was how it was done. But their view of one another was blocked by dancers. Who was dancing with whom? That seemed to be crucial to the evening. What was the hierarchy? It seemed to her that the more senior family were dancing with the more senior servants, although the men and women pairings did not always work. It sounded like a hypothesis proposed by a scientist at the University of Munich, who had written in a letter the idea that as well as being in specific places, electrons paired up with one another based on their spin. This amused Milo to think of the people before her as electrons, finding their proper place, and she tried to think of a hypothesis in this social situation, but she could not fix on anything in her mind. The dance was slowing, a signal that it was about to end, and Alfred was standing up, trying to get her attention by smiling and waving. But then the tempo increased, and the dancers continued with more of the same. Milo didn't want to be there anymore. The music was too loud, the people too chaotic. When her view was blocked by dancers, Milo got up, and slipped out of the hall, crossing to the steps near the front of the hall, sitting down on them. The music was quieter there, and Milo's mind drifted to the next morning, catching the train back to Manchester, and going back to work, beside Chadwick, beside Blackett and Cockcroft. So many plans, such a lot to do, such a lot to find out and discover. Never being disturbed unless she felt hungry, or until Professor Rutherford reminded her it was time to go home, and she was never bothered in the Rutherford house. No one expected her to appear for breakfast if she didn't want to, or to sit up in an evening. "Look, I am so sorry about what happened earlier," came a voice near her ear. Milo turned and saw Tom Branson. She got to her feet and refused to look away from him. "I am not a thief," Milo told him, determinedly. Branson looked at her for a moment, then looked away. "I know you're not," he admitted. "But you called me one," she insisted. "I am sorry, I shouldn't have," he told her. "I know you are not now, and no one else thinks you are, Milo. I have given Lady Mary the cost of their repair." "But that wasn't the point." "But, you said I was a thief." "People make mistakes," Tom sighed. "And this was a mistake that I made, Miss Mrs. Barrow." "Ashby," Milo told him. "That is what my colleagues call me." "And she was a research associate here." Tonight could not be more evidence that Thomas should have left her in her room. "But you needn't have paid for it. I was holding on to." Tom Branson chuckled for a moment. "No," he told Milo, firmly, "I insist. They must be very special to you." "Special to Thomas," Milo told him. "He gave that to me when we got married." "And you love him?" Tom asked her. "Look, another mistake," Tom told her, when he saw her face. But Milo shook her head. "No," Milo told him. "He is like Ernest to me." "Your brother?" Milo nodded. "Yes. He has always been like Ernest to me, but a little bit apart," Milo replied. "I think I know what you mean," Tom Branson told her. "My brother is a little bit apart from me too." He nodded to the hall. "Why aren't you dancing?" Milo looked where Branson had nodded. "I don't being in there, I am too different," she told him. "Me too," Tom Branson told her. "Like you, I am neither family nor servant." The music faded. Then, Another song filled the air. "What is it your brother was arguing with you about?" Milo asked him. "What does he want you to do?" "God almighty, I forgot you could speak the Irish." He told her. "Nothing," he said at length, and sat down on the steps where Milo had been not 5 minutes before. "There is nothing I can do for him anymore, and I am glad for it." Milo looked at him and nodded. Words were always the most important thing to Milo, for it was hard for her to discern meaning from people's faces, which was a pity, for, if she could, she might have seen Tom Branson's face betray him. "Would you dance with me?" Tom asked, in Irish. "I would," Milo answered, "although I don't know how." Branson smiled and moved his feet. "It's easy," he told her. "If I can do it, anyone can." A few minutes later, Milo held up her head and placed her arms over Tom Branson's. "A waltz has started up. This has 3 beats to the bar," he told her. 1 2 3, 1 2 3. He moved his feet to the rhythm and Milo followed, only treading on his shoes a few times. "The now," he said, encouragingly. "Good enough for Mr. Barrow, too." He dipped his head towards Milo, "And to tell me, was that the real reason you could dance, so you didn't want to dance with such an expert?" Then Milo realized that Tom had moved away, but his question still confounded her. "Was what the real reason?" she asked him. "The real reason?" But she saw Tom Branson looking past her, and she turned and saw Thomas. "I expect Mr. Branson is just teasing you, not realizing you don't quite understand what he means," Thomas told her, sighing with mild exasperation, like a parent catching a child doing something silly. Again, as he walked across to them, Tom Branson glanced to Thomas, and then to the floor for a minute, then looked to Milo. "Oh, all right," Milo said, giving a nod to Tom. "Thank you, Mr. Branson, for the dancing lesson." "My pleasure, Mrs. Barrow," Tom replied, ignoring the scornful on Thomas Barrow's face. "Best to go to dance with your expert." It was a good job that Tom had shown Milo something, for the dances were now free dances and anyone could dance with anyone else, as long as they were a male and female couple, Milo noticed. But the music was faster, and did not know the type of dance, but the steps for the waltz did not fit, and more than once, she trod on Thomas's foot. "Keep your head up, Milo," Thomas told her. "The straighter you are, the more the steps will fit." There was laughter behind her, and she turned, as Mr. Crawley and Lord Grantham exchanged something, presumably humorous, and she noticed that there were fewer couples up, and several people were in close-headed conversations. Thankfully, the music slowed, and then stopped. Thomas took her hand with his own and led her to the chairs. "For a beginner, you were good," he told her, and as she let go of his hand, Thomas was away, and dancing another dance, this time with Lady Edith. There, Milo thought. They had danced and Thomas was off, now, with someone else. Perhaps that was another rule, that people had to dance with as many people as possible. "Would you dance with me, Miss Ashby?" It was Alfred. He was standing tall and official. She noticed across from her, Jimmy and Ivy were staring at them both. Could she say no? Milo could not see a precedent set. However, that did not mean that it couldn't happen. And Thomas had danced with her, although they were married, so did it count? What did she need to say? What did she need to do? Milo tried to find Thomas, to see if she could gain any insight that way, but his back was turned to her and he seemed to be conversing deeply with Lady Edith. She looked back up to Alfred, who had extended a hand to her, and she took it. What else was there to do? There was no plan for refusal, there was no exit plan. "You dance well," Alfred told her, although Milo was having to reach up rather high onto his arms to find herself in the same position as she had been with Tom Branson and Thomas. "Thank you," she replied. "And ... and do you like it at Downton?" he asked. "Yes," Milo agreed. The music picked up the pace, and Milo narrowly avoided the footman's toes with her heel as he turned her away from her. "Milo seems to be dancing well," Lady Mary told the Dowager. "Considering she spent her life scampering around here." "She's Irish," Tom Branson told them, before Violet Crawley could think of a put-down. "All the Irish can dance." "Irish?" Miss Ashby?" the Dowager asked, as if she was mistaken in what she was hearing. Her mother was a Jameson, Tom explained, glancing over to her. Her grandfather owned the Jameson whiskey. Ah, an Anglo, the Dowager replied. Anglo-Irish, I mean. I thought your Irish disliked the Anglo-Irish. I know the Jamesons, Tom admitted. Not well, but I do. I have been to Enniscorthy myself. Well, that's unexpected, Violet Crawley replied. That you actually know a noble family in Ireland? Rare, yes, Tom admitted. But they are a good family, as are the Inchikins, he thought to himself. Well, they do make whiskey, Lady Mary remarked. And then Tom Branson asked her to dance, and partners were swapped again, and Alfred, who had indeed been set up to ask Milo, had spent his time telling her how his dream was to be a chef, and to work with food, and that his aunt, O'Brien, had helped him get the job while she had barely said 2 words to him. Thank you for asking me, Milo told him. It is good to hear about your ambition. And she waited until he had let her hand go, before sitting back down. And as she watched Alfred cross back of it to his friends, Milo made a quick plan that when the dancing began again, she would leave and go down to her room. Sleep would be needed for an early start, even if people were staying up to see in the new year. What did she say? Jimmy asked him, as he returned over to them, heads bent eagerly for the gossip he had been sent to get. About old Barrow? Shush, he'll hear you, Ivy cautioned, looking beyond the 2 footmen for danger. So, what did she say? Jimmy repeated. Not much, Alfred admitted. I mainly talked about myself. I don't think she's much of a talker. I'll try, Jimmy told him, and pushed him out of the way. Milo was on her feet and at the door when he caught up with her. Are you going to bed? He asked her, disappointed. Milo nodded. And you don't want to dance? Number. Shall I come down with you? He asked, holding out his hand. Milo looked at it, and then listened to his question again in her head. Come down with me? Milo repeated, confused. To your room? We could talk. Yeah, what? The shout came from behind him, and Milo turned her head to see Thomas glaring at them. He gave Jimmy a look, before quickly turning to the door, calling, Mr. Carson, what is all the fuss out here? Carson, slower than usual, came out of the hall, and looked between Thomas, Jimmy and Milo. Are you going to repeat what you just said to Milo to Mr. Carson, or do I have to? Thomas demanded. I